Okay, let's allow people. There are people filing in right now, but we are starting. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the fifth episode of Designing Your Research Agenda. My name is Dan Wong. I'm co-founder and executive director of Design Incubation. We are now officially a 501(c)(3), start as of 2024. Um, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in design incubation, and then I'll hand things over to my colleagues Jess Burness and Heather Quinn, who will then take over and make introductions and run the program. So design incubation, we are now in our I think it's 13th year of existence. We started off basically to engage with faculty design researchers to be able to present work that they were doing for scholarship and publication. And we really started off with the colloquia. This program, the Designing Your Research Agenda, started back 5 years ago, and I'll actually let Heather and just tell you a little bit more about that. But let me just quickly tell you about some of the activities that are currently in our programming. We are going through peer review for two events that are going to run in the summer. We're doing our first graduate panel specific colloquia for graduate students. We're doing that back to back with our typical design incubation colloquia. So that's going to run in June. So watch out for that. We are currently in the review process for the CAA conference, so we have yet to hear from them exactly our date and that sort of thing. But watch out, we are accepting, if not now, like in the next few days or weeks, abstracts. And the deadline for the CAA conference always falls in the summertime. So we'll be accepting those up until, I forget, I think it's July, and then we do reviews in August. And we also have planned a colloquia for the fall. We are hoping that it will be in person, but we're still kind of working out those details. So it's sort of up in the air whether or not it's going to be in person or virtual. But we are accepting abstracts for that as well. Just to let people know, we are always looking for institutions and people to host our colloquia. We're just now getting back to in-person colloquia, and the in-person ones are particularly special because people get to network and meet each other face to face. And there's not enough of that happening, since the pandemic. A lot of those have just gone virtual and haven't really necessarily come back. One of the challenges I know for faculty, however, is that everybody's budgets have been cut, and so we don't all have travel. So we're going to be continuing to do many virtual colloquia, but we are looking for hosts for our in-person colloquia. The other thing that's a deadline that's coming up very soon is we're going to be running the second annual academic abstract writing program. So we invite faculty who are interested in either workshopping an abstract, or if you're junior faculty and are still trying to understand how to craft and write an abstract, or even discuss the focus of your research. That's kind of something else that we do. So we're open for applications right now, and the deadline for that is coming up. It's April 25th. So I encourage everyone to apply for that. So at this point, I will hand things over to Heather and Jess, and I will remove myself and run the tech in the background. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dan. You want to start, Jess?
Okay, hi everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is our fifth iteration of Designing Your Research Agenda, which we have affectionately given the acronym DYRA, as we like to call it. This started actually 6 years ago at a College Art Association at a CAA event, and we liked the format. We liked the idea of sharing research agendas in this way. And so each year, Heather and I have been hosting at least one of these. and inviting in faculty members, researchers to talk about their research agendas, how they found their flow with things, what they're doing, how they piece these things together. And in each year we do this, we aim to have a group of faculty from different kinds of institutions, different kinds of academic backgrounds, different kinds of professional experiences, and so forth. Um, this particular session for DYRA is based on a very international group of panelists, and we're really excited that you're all here today to join us.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, we really hope this space inspires people and shows quite a diversity of work and institutions and different ways to bring things, manifest things into the field and into the world. The other exciting thing, I think, for those that are, for the attendees that are here, is that all of these are recorded. So if you want to go back or you want to see some of the previous ones, we have quite a breadth. We've had another international one. We have different types of institutions, from art schools to teaching institutions across. And we're always looking to sort of elevate lesser known voices and maybe people that are off the beaten path, who are doing cool things or are learning to do new things. So please also share folks with us, and don't be shy if you're interested in sharing your own work. We really try to foster an environment that feels casual and welcoming and very community driven. So yeah, that's it. So that being said, the way it will go is we have three presenters, about 15 minutes each. You can put comments into the chat, and Jessica and I will kind of moderate or hold those. And then at the end, we usually welcome those that we can't see. We can see your names, but not all of you. Welcome you to join the Zoom session, kind of behind the scenes. So we can all be together if we want to do that. So we'll save some of the QA for the end. So now I've already forgotten who we said was going to go first. Jessica.
First off, well, the order we're going to be presenting in, we just made a change, so everybody bear with me as I probably mess this up. We're going to be starting out with Robert Harlan from Loughborough University in the UK, followed by Kelly Salco MacArthur, who's at Michigan State and currently at University College in Cork, Ireland. And then we will be hearing from Leslie Ann Noel from OCAD University. So Robert, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can see it. Is that right? Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yep.
it's there. Yeah, all good.
Sorry. And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. My name's Robert Harland. I'm a reader in urban graphic and creative arts at Loughborough University. The most recent of a lengthy career. I won't be talking too much about photography, but the image on screen is of me taking photographs, and that's what I tend to do quite a lot these days when I visit various places, and you'll see a lot of the result of that in this talk. The invitation to make the presentations identified several interesting topics to refer to, and I thought I'd hit them head on straight away. So the whole of this time is a 40-year period. I think in getting this invitation, it made me realize that it was 1986, I think, when I graduated from a little-known information graphics degree. And of course, this year is a 40th anniversary of that year. So it was really interesting to look back. But I'm also going to reflect briefly on the next 5 years, because I thought it was quite nice to also think as part of a research agenda about what's happening next. I was asked to comment on what I thought research was about, and I just put this brief statement: advancing knowledge about unknown things, which I hope we would all agree on. We can unpack that a little bit more later if you wish. I work in a research intense institution, but I work in a subject area, or not a department exactly, but something that might resemble a department, which is very teaching intense. And that's because it's a a sort of area of graphic design, and that is a very popular subject and has lots of students, and therefore there's a lot of teaching activity. But also, if I look at that across several institutions I've worked at, I've been working at Loughborough for 18 years or so, and it's a research intense institution. But I previously worked in institutions that were less research intensive and much more teaching orientated. To categorize my work, I would probably talk about it being transdisciplinary. And I could use a whole host of other words as well, but that's currently how I would frame what I do. In terms of design research, which covers lots of other sort of components. And barriers was also an interesting question there. There's numerous barriers I could have referred to here, not only the sort of sense of funding or whatever it might be, but my own sort of personal internal barriers that I've had to confront for most of that 40 years. But I tend to look at barriers as not recognizing them at all. I've come to recognize that I tend to focus more on horizons and not on barriers, because I think that there's I kind of take the view that, well, if you're not going to let me do it, I'm going to do it anyway, sort of approach to things. And if I hadn't taken that approach, then I wouldn't be very doing the sort of things I'm doing now. Going back to the category thing, the antidisciplinary is a word I heard mentioned in one of your earlier seminar sessions, which I thought was very interesting. And that's certainly a word that I've been become more familiar with recently. And I just thought I'd give you a version of antidisciplinary, which I read about a year ago, and it really, really resonated with me. In particular, this is from a guy called Harris. And I won't read this out in full, but he's trying to explain the notion of what disciplinary thinking means. And this last few lines about deeply immersing yourself in a discipline combined with the constant subjecting to knowledge deriving from the discipline to that developed in others, is very much what I've been doing, I'd say now, for probably about, pretty much, I think, for 20 years or so. That sense of actually, enjoying your disciplinary perspective, understanding it, but exposing it to others. And you'll see through this presentation how I've done that and continue to do that in terms of challenging the disciplinary constraints or norms that one might associate with one's own field. Interestingly, I think on the publicity, there was a little bit of a reordering of my readership title, which said Graphic Urban Heritage, which I thought was very interesting. I thought I'd take advantage of that little kind of change around. And because the order of that reflects really the timeline, the high level timeline of my career. If you take it in 15-year stints, then I spent the first 15 years immersing myself in graphic design practice as a practitioner. And if there's time, I'll say a little bit more about that. Between 2001 and 2015, I returned to education as a lecturer in graphic design, but I also undertook a PhD and started to look at architecture and urban design. So I was very much back in a learning mode there. And again, I'll come back to that. And the last 10 years or so, I've been focused on heritage as an area for contextualizing my work, which sort of links the graphic and the urban together. So when I say I'm a reader in urban graphic heritage, those three words actually characterize the three parts of my career, really, over the last 40 years at various stages. So I just want to briefly say a little bit about the early stage, but I won't say too much. Certainly in the early phase, I was very much working in graphic design as a typical practitioner at that time, and producing the kind of work that you might expect somebody working in a reasonable level might be doing. I was based in London. I took a job when I left college at a company called Design in Action. I then went to work for a small practice called Tatham Pierce. Then I set up my own practice and worked for 10 years as Harlan Design. And what you can see on screen is just a sort of smattering of several projects that I did over that time, which again would be very typically identified with graphic design, from brochures, logos, commissioning of photography, corporate identity, and then wayfinding and signage, which I came to quite late on and started to point me towards the direction of urban design and architecture, which I'll say a little bit more. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what I spent the earlier part of my career doing. The next part of my career, as I mentioned, was in education. And I really went into education to actually try and understand research, although I didn't actually understand what research meant at the time. I just knew that I'd reached a point in my practice where it wasn't really revealing too much more to me, and there were new challenges that I could see. and I wanted to find some space to actually do some postgraduate work. So I took a teaching job, and then soon after enrolled for a PhD. From that period, I worked in several institutions, all of which were quite different. In 2001, I took a job at a place called the University of Derby, which was a very small college come sort of higher education come university place or institution. 2003, I moved to Nottingham Trent University and worked as a lecturer and became the program director there. In fact, I was program director in both of those places. And then in 2008, I moved to Loughborough. Having risen a little bit in the ranks, I was focusing on doing more work on a PhD, which I'd started in 2004 in a School of Architecture and Built Environment, actually. I enrolled in 2004 and I was doing it part-time on a self-funded basis. So I moved to Loughborough because it had a much more research-intensive environment. And I really knew that I needed to be in that kind of space if I was going to be able to develop the research interests that I had. So this period is very much about me learning about higher education and what that meant and how it functioned, but also educating myself in the sort of in various aspects of research through doing a PhD. So trying to understand what academic research meant through the process of doing a PhD. So it was as much about what is a PhD as much as what the subject is that I was interested in. My question, which took about 3 or 4 years to sort of germinate in my head and eventually rolled off my tongue when I went to an open day at the University of Nottingham, expecting to meet some academics, and was introduced to a postgraduate student who said, well, if you give me your research question, I'll pass it on to our tutors and they might get back to you. So what are the visual communication requirements of a built environment? Just rolled off the tongue out of the blue. Don't know where it came from, but obviously those 3 or 4 years I'd been thinking about it, it came out, and that really started the sort of ball rolling. And then I met with supervisors, and the rest is history, really. That culminated in a PhD that I completed in 2010-11. This is the front cover of a traditional kind of booklet. Here's a copy of it here. Sorry, a traditional dissertation, should I say. And my topic was graphic design as urban design towards a theory for analyzing graphic objects in urban environments. And that really set the train in motion then of what I've been doing since, although I did need a 3-year break from that because it just about kind of broke me, I think, in terms of doing a PhD part-time. So I took a bit of a break from it, and then I returned to that a little bit later. And that's where the sort of next phase of that work comes in. So 2014, 15, 16, I started to apply the learning from that sort of PhD experience. And I started to kind of work towards this idea of graphic heritage and graphic design and urban graphic heritage and that kind of stuff. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But in terms of what I'm going to be working on next, this is really what I'm going to be focusing on. In 2025, I became involved in storytelling education for sustainability. I became part of the Global Urban Observatory Network. We also launched the Town Observatory, and I'm part of a Civic Universities partnership. So that's kind of where I'm going next. But that really comes from work that I've been doing in the last few years. I've been leading a project looking at town observatories. We launched the Loughborough Town Observatory last year. We're working with local studies groups, really looking at their needs when it comes to how they want to communicate what they're interested in. So by all means, have a look at that if you get the time. We're working with software like the ArcGIS Story Maps platform. This is a platform we mentioned earlier about not mentioning AI, but this actually does incorporate AI-generated podcasts, which are spoken by members of the Library Studies group who are co-creating this sort of idea of graphic heritage with us. That involves some printed material as well. We're working with this concept of graphic heritage, and we've been doing so for 7 or 8 years now. We draw on Mitchell's work on notions of graphic image, particularly his sort of sense of how art historians use that work. And this definition on the right-hand side from Waterton and Watson is one that we use for heritage. There's many definitions out there. I particularly like this one because it mentions places for purposes and consumption. And I could talk about a whole load of other references for graphics, from Drucker's work to Abraham Roll's work in the 1980s, Will Burton's work, and even stuff like graphicacy from geography and those kind of things. So I have a fairly broad perspective on graphics, and we've really tried to test the boundaries of what that might mean. Just a second. So our work about 5 or 6 years ago focused around this notion of what new perspectives can graphic design contribute to design for urban heritage. And that manifests itself in urban graphic heritage. This was one of the images I sent to you for the publicity, and this was an image I photographed recently in India. And I'm very much interested in this notion of how we think through graphic images and how we work across different media. And this was taken from some local craftspeople who are creating images. Again, I can elaborate a lot more on that if there was more time, but it gives you a bit of a sense of, what's this kind of thinking that's happening when somebody is, tracing things, transferring those things onto cloth and then sewing images and all that kind of thing, really. To give you a bit of a sense of who's been interested in our work, we did a project in China, and UNESCO became very interested in that, and they were willing to review that work and then sort of explore it and criticize it. We've worked with Nelson Mandela Foundation, we're working with the Gauteng City Region Observatory. UNESCO reviewed our work and critiqued it and gave us some really interesting ideas around structuring graphic design and graphic objects. This is, again, some sort of inputs from people at UNESCO about how we can use graphic design as a perspective on things. It was based on this idea of graphic heritage in relation to heritage interpretation, presentation, and representation. And we shared these ideas with UNESCO in terms of talking about how this sort of lineage of ideas that comes from things like the Trajan's letter inscription, for example. What is the heritage we're talking about? Why is it heritage? And then how is it represented in everyday life? I think I'm coming to the end of my time, so I'm just going to finish off with a few more comments. I've got a minute or two left. And several other examples we shared with UNESCO as well, to do with if you take a material like raw slate, and then you consider the process of how slates are made, and then you think about their impression that we have or how they impact on us in everyday life, then again, we can look at how graphic heritage works across these sort of different material, structural and sort of applications of those ideas as well. And this was a similar idea for a clock in a listed modern bus station in a town in the UK. So we've had some nice comments about this idea of graphic heritage, and now it has lots of potential for the future. And we've also been working with people like the Bradford City of Film, UNESCO Fit City of Film, again, exploring this idea of graphic heritage. And I'm hoping I can finish on this work with Nelson Mandela Foundation. Again, they were very interested in this idea. And so we started to look at place names with Nelson Mandela Foundation, looking at Nelson Mandela Park in Leicester and one in South Africa. We also visited their archive and started to talk to them about objects they held in their archive and why they were so meaningful in relation to graphic heritage. And we hosted an exhibition there about 6 places named after Nelson Mandela, which was developed over a couple of years and is still being exhibited in several places now. And there's a QR code there if you're interested in looking at that online. And it included QR codes, and it increased traffic to their archive and all sorts of other things as well. I'm going to stop there actually, because I think I'm probably up on time. But the prior sort of 5 years traces a little bit more of the work that we did in establishing the graphic design research unit, and then different funding bodies who then became involved in the various projects that we've worked on. So happy to talk later about more of that, but I'll maybe stop there if that's okay, because I think my time is up.
Thank you, Robert. We will save questions collectively for the end. So hang on to them. And I appreciate you paying attention to the time. Next up is Kelly, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I'll try to share my screen here. And I'll, oops.
Success.
Yes, although getting rid of the view is funny. Does that look like full screen to you?
No. We can work with that. It's okay.
Okay, let's just go with this.
Okay.
Really happy to be here this evening for me, midday for a lot of you. As was mentioned early on, I'm a professor of graphic design at Michigan State University, but I'm spending 6 months in Cork, Ireland at University College Cork, within the School of Education. And I'm about halfway through that period. It's been excellent. The origins for my research agenda lie in my personal experience and interests, education, and the work after graduation. So what I'm showing, I'll be showing a bunch of my work as I kind of talk through this. I went to the University of Cincinnati for my undergraduate, got a Bachelor of Science in the School of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. I then worked as a graphic designer for a few years before going back to school at Rhode Island School of Design. What you see here is my thesis book in expanded form. It was a combination of the imagery and the writing that captured those 2 years. When I was at RISD, it was really imbued in us that we would follow a process of reading, thinking, making, and reflecting, and writing, and then doing it all over again. So I've held on to that
Hey,
process.
Kelly, are you
Yeah.
flipping through slides?
No,
Oh, okay, good.
we're just on one slide so
Okay,
far.
good.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
there was a
Okay.
question.
Yeah, we're actually we're not seeing your book. We're still seeing
Oh, you're
your
not?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
no.
We got
Okay.
excited and then we couldn't
We're on
see
the
it.
title slide. Yeah.
Let's see. Never good to have technical difficulties here. I'll try that again. For some reason, when I started sharing, the share window showed up in a different place than when we were testing this out, as it did again here.
Okay, now
Let's
we're
see.
seeing a book.
Okay, well, that's good. That's something. If I could just,
Do you want to try to flip quick and
Mhm.
make sure it moves? Or go to another slide?
yeah, let's see.
Yes. Okay.
Did that, okay.
I think it's working now.
Not that I want to stay on that image.
I do. Cool. All right. All
Okay,
you.
so here we go. So when I was at RISD, I was an instructor of record every semester there. That prompted my interest in teaching. And after RISD, I was teaching at the College of New Jersey for a couple years while I was training as an elite athlete. Then I went on to Kansas City Art Institute and taught there for 2 years, which was is a private art and design school that focuses on teaching. And then I went to Michigan State University in 2006. So that's an R1 large public land grant institution. Through all of this work in design and education and practice, I was also training for rowing. That actually helped me plan my time well in terms of time management to have two passions that are kind of equally pulling at you. But it was really this time on the water that embedded in me a true deep connection to the environment. So I looked to Victor Papanek's quote here, design must be the bridge between human needs, culture, and ecology. Of course, his introduction of the concept of treating ecology as an important part of that relationship is something that has steered me. And I didn't come upon this until just a couple years ago, but Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson shares this Venn diagram that I would find very helpful. What brings you joy? For me, that's designing, the act of designing, and also rowing and being outside. What am I good at? I would say design and rowing, if I could really boil it down to two simple points. And what needs doing? Over and over again, I come back to environmental action. So I'll show you some of my work here. Pre-tenure, I was really focusing on local, regional, and some national opportunities for peer review and dissemination. This was a banner I designed for the Urban Forest Project. Some of you may remember that as greening the urban environments was an initiative that was happening in different cities across the United States. This poster I designed in response to Fritjof Capra's concept of the web of life that references the intrinsic values of all living beings and viewing humans just as one strand in that web. And I designed this poster in response to the 2010 Gulf oil spill, which was the largest marine oil spill of petroleum in history, and integrated a quote by Rachel Carson, which you see around the droplet shape there. She wrote this in 1962 in Silent Spring. In an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind even to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become the victim of his indifference. She was way ahead of her time. Another poster I designed, One Drop, a Continuous Ripple, references the choices that each of us make. Every single choice we make has ramifications, environmentally speaking. So I can mention here that I've been engaged in different kinds of research and still am, but now I do very consciously focus on creative activity. I realized that's what I was best at. I consistently am driven by environmental issues. And in my work, I want to meet the expectations of my university, which is 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service. At MSU, graphic design is within the Department of Art History, and Design. So I find myself with fine artists and recognize that I have to position my work clearly within the discipline and demonstrate its impact. At the same time, creative output and activity is respected and acknowledged. So the question that was posed to us, how do you define research and why do you think it matters for society, the field, and yourself? I would say forward progress, substantiated by peer review, while being relevant within current dialogue is important. I think it's also important for this work to go beyond the academy to serve the public, as graphic design inherently intends to. And this is also at a time when visual communication is only gaining relevance as we move towards more visual society. Through my work, reflection, and writing, I've discovered some points of clarity. So I call it the social, political, and environmental work. I do design activism. I refer to myself as a citizen designer working towards impact and change. Specifically, I focus on awareness, advocacy, and action in environmental topics. So of course, this is informed by Stephen Heller and Veronica Vienne's Citizen Designer, which was published in 2003. It's also helpful that MSU, College of Arts and Letters, started a Citizen Scholar program. So I fit into the mission strategically there. I consciously try to balance and push myself in terms of form and content. And so when I think of the form, and this framing it this way has also helped in terms of how I talk about my work and present it to peers for RPT review. I consider the work I do inquiry through making. So it's design practice, it's design research, it's informed by current events, environmental news, and science. This is all outside of our discipline. Inspired formally by architecture, industrial design, and paper engineering. And I integrate visual form with dimensional, material, and production experimentation. So making thinking visible, or giving form and physicality to abstract ideas, is what Project Zero of Harvard's Graduate School of Education would call visible thinking. I really enjoy employing tactile and visual senses and working haptically, and wrote about that practice in an article published in Dialectic. 2019 sounds like a long time ago now, but it doesn't feel like a long time ago. One of the projects that I wrote about, and it was intended to be a visual narrative, but it turned into an entire full-length article. One of the projects was this Elevate poster that I commercially printed and then laser cut, and I sent it around the world to different architects, artists, designers, and asked them to respond to it and alter it in some way, then write about that, photograph it. This was an altered version that I actually did, and all of those, that collection is on my website still. That poster was recognized by Graphi's Poster Annual with a Gold Award. Another poster series that I included in the Dialectic article is Look, Listen, and Feel. And this points to the biophilia that I practice in my own work. I alluded to the deep environmental connection when I showed that image of myself rowing. This is trying to prompt people to get out into the environment and connect with nature and the environment through their senses. I would say that each project can be disseminated in multiple ways, and we should take advantage of that as much as possible for the farthest reaching impact and visibility. So, for instance, posters can be submitted to award competitions, shown in exhibitions and festivals, spoken about and included in conferences. They can be published. Some of this can lead to residencies, such as this project, which was collaborative with two colleagues of mine from MSU. This had to do with our dependence on plastic, and most specifically plastic bags, and our misuse of that material. So we developed an entire installation created with entirely salvaged plastic and upcycled plastic. Part of this project was a residency at Spring Creek project through Oregon State University. Of course, with any of this work, proof of peer review and dissemination is really important. In the context that I work in, our efforts do not count as research until they've been peer reviewed, and the mode of the research and peer review is flexible, but they do consider the reputation and the selectivity of the forum. The residency in this entire collaborative project was facilitated by internal grants from MSU. And I do recognize that those internal funding opportunities are worth going for. It's also the way that I've been able to spend 6 months at University College Cork. Academia also gives us flexibility in terms of the projects we choose to pursue and the content we are working with. Sometimes this is collaborative. In this case, I reached out to UK poet laureate Maura Dooley and created a piece of concrete poetry with her poem Still Life with Sea Pinks and High Tide. In terms of what barriers exist in the field, and this has already been touched on, limited exhibition opportunities for graphic design, as well as limited large external grant opportunities. This was a green mapping project that resulted when I reached out to an eco organization in Monroe County, which is not where I live in Michigan, but an agricultural community that needed connection between the agricultural sector and the people who lived in that area. It was also a green tips for everyday routines and choices. There were other components to the system. This project won MSU's Distinguished Partnership Award for Community Engaged Service. And the external funding and collaboration really does allow for some really exciting projects. I also continue to create commissioned work for clients. What I'm showing here is a poster series that just recently was installed in University of Michigan's Museum of Natural History about microplastics. So based on information, the research of a chemistry professor at U of M, and in collaboration with museum staff, this is a series of posters that's supposed to leave people feeling empowered as they have just learned about this crisis of microplastics. And something that may be familiar to this group is the Get Out the Vote campaigns that AIJ typically hosts every 4 years. Now, as the 2020 election was approaching, it sounded like they were actually not going to be hosting the Get Out the Vote poster initiative. And I realized that it was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote in the United States. So I partnered with Nancy Skolos. We did end up partnering with AIGA and the League of Women Voters. Part of that project was researching and designing this timeline for voting rights and women's fight for equality. It was a poster collection. This was the poster I designed. And all of those posters, the 65 posters from 71 women, were captured in a newspaper style catalog The one on the back here is by Frances Alana. Hers was the 65th of the 64. The rest of the 64 were in alphabetical order inside the catalog. In terms of further dissemination, this won an Editor's Choice Award from IIID in Vienna. And the last project I'll show you, and I'll go through this quickly, is that going for the long shots has turned out quite well in some cases. So being a two-time Olympian, I was able to apply for an Olympian artist residency. I was accepted into 2020 for Tokyo and 2024 for Paris. These are the banners I designed for Tokyo 2020 that integrated my own writing and my photography. These hung before, during, and after the Olympics, and I was the only graphic designer accepted into the program in each of those instances. And if I can just wrap up here with a few tips, I think it is smart to align with the institutional mission. Of course, that becomes more of a question if you think you may not be staying at that institution, and in that case, to think broadly is intelligent. Do what you love and what you're good at. Being efficient and strategic becomes important. So for instance, one poster can go a long way towards award, exhibition, publication, conference presentation. Considering all kinds of relevant dissemination is a smart consideration. It's important how we talk about our work and our efforts so that we can instill understanding for peer review, for tenure review, for instance, and continuing to grow and be responsive. Looking outside the discipline for dissemination opportunities and new networks can lead to really exciting possibilities. Considering both solo and collaborative efforts, while most of my work is self-initiated in some way, and the larger projects, of course, include collaboration. Some of the furthest reaching projects have involved outreach, and of course, involvement in leadership roles with disciplinary and scholarly organizations is important and does absolutely support research. So I'll wrap it up there. I think I went a couple minutes over, but handing it off to Leslie here. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I
Thank you,
just jump
Kelly.
in?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, whenever you're ready.
all right. So we can't have any tech problems because there's no tech. I have some speaker notes in the background, and I thought maybe a free-flowing conversation could be useful for this. And actually, my lack of slides and notes is actually a reflection of like where I am today, right now. So my name is Leslie Ann Noel, and I'm the Dean of Design at OCAD. And my calendar is booked from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon every single day. And if the presentation wasn't made before, it's not going to get made now because literally the time doesn't exist. So, I'll have maybe a different kind of research story to share. So we got 6 questions, and I figured we have 15 minutes, so I'll just go through them and take maybe about 3 minutes on each question. So the first question is about how I determine my research agenda. And I guess in my career, there is a small R research and a big R research. And I think at undergrad, I had a really solid introduction to research through the faculty who I was able to work with. And so, my undergrad experience, which happened in Brazil, I studied in a town called Curitiba in Brazil, and it's at the equivalent, I suppose, of an R1 university in Brazil. And, I was able to see the way my professors were excited about research. And, we did an undergrad thesis, and my thesis focused on my room. And that maybe is, I'll expand it a little bit more, but that's like an insight into how you find a research question. So my research question, I am an industrial designer, and my research question at undergrad was about redesigning. I lived on the university campus, and I was redesigning the furniture in the bedroom that I lived in with 2 other people. And actually, a lot of the research that I've done has always been about these very, very personal questions, where I'm digging and poking and maybe trying to find a world that I want, right? So, like in my notes, I have written here, what kind of world do I want for me? And then when I became a parent, actually the questions changed and it became, what kind of world do I want for my son? And so that started to affect a lot of the types of questions I was asking. Um, I'm a practitioner and an activist, and so I am always, and maybe a prototyper. So I'm always doing things and putting out and sharing some unfinished ideas and getting feedback on them. My research agenda has been about a few questions. When I actually went up for tenure, I was able to kind of synthesize it and create a narrative around equity. But maybe it's like four different research agendas and equity and change become a through line. So one agenda is about epistemic equity. That's something that I've become very known for, which is related to like who gets to design or who gets to define design knowledge and where what does design look like across different places? And again, that's very personal because I'm from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, a really tiny, tiny country. I did industrial design and I had to think while I was in university about what would life look like for me as an industrial designer in a place that didn't have a lot of industry. And so some of the work that I do around design in a world of many worlds that's related to, again, me questioning the worlds that I live in and how someone like me fits into the many worlds of design. Um, so from UFPR in Brazil, where I did undergrad, I went back to Trinidad. And so that's a different era in my design practice where I was teaching, I was doing maybe, I don't know if maybe small R research, or maybe I was trying to make it big R research, but I didn't have a lot of support. I didn't understand. And maybe I'll be vulnerable and say I was kind of scrambling at the first part of my career where I was trying to figure out how to get to tenure, because I was in a university, got a tenure track position, but didn't really get a lot of mentorship in that first place that I was at. I loved it, right? But I did not. I actually ended up having to take on a leadership role pre-tenure, which is something that now I talk with people about, that we have to manage the amount of work that we do in the institution because it will take us away from the same things that the institution wants to value. And my leadership role, my dean actually pulled me aside and said, you can't get tenure in the way that you're working right now, even though they created the situation. But and actually, it's a reality that happens to a lot of people, right? That so I I got leave to then go and do a PhD because actually the dean was very clear. I was at a research intensive university, and they said, okay, you have to go and do this PhD, and then you can come back and maybe you'll get tenure then. So that then moved me to another institution. And I moved to North Carolina State University to do my PhD. And that's when the R started to get, I suppose, maybe a little bit bigger. Before, I was focusing on locality, um, materials. I was teaching and maybe doing the research through the classes, as writing about some of the classes and then guiding students, advising students in their work. At NC State, I learned more about research in a very formal way because I was doing a PhD. And then the questions that my research question became about teaching and learning design thinking through a critical lens. And then I started there. And then what you learn in the PhD process is you have to get narrower and narrower and narrower. And so I I had to pick a site to do my intervention. So it was teaching and learning design thinking through a critical lens in a rural village in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's what my PhD was about. It was about creating empowering education using design methods. And I will say that that really changed radically my practice, because then my practice really became much more about social change and social innovation, because the work that I did, I did an intervention with children, taught them some design methods, and used an existing research framework called Critical Utopian Action Research. And I encouraged the students to think about change. That's what, for 3 weeks, they had to propose changes to the world around them. And I did that work in 2017, but I would say that I've continued using those methodologies about getting people to talk about the change that they're interested in, and then acting on it. So I've moved away from an object-focused practice as an industrial designer, and I've really moved towards more process, getting people to reflect on what they think is needed, and then to design something, but sometimes it's not the design thing that we're trying to focus on. It's just the process of getting people to say what it is that they need, right? So it's the process has changed. I'll continue talking about maybe the different university experiences, because actually I've worked, some international people might understand the kind of chaotic path. I've worked at 5 different universities, so in Trinidad at the University of the West Indies. I studied at NC State. I was an international student, and then international students can remain in the US for 3 years afterwards. So towards the end of my PhD, I got a fellowship at Stanford. So I was like, yay, that gives me an extra year. And that changed my practice again. I was a teaching fellow. And so that opened up my world in a different way, because at the D School at Stanford, there's a lot of experimentation around curriculum. So it made me see ways that we could be using design, collaborating across design in different ways. Like there was a class about design and politics, or redesigning the government, or something like that. And then a lot of the DEI work that I suppose became known for is related to that time at Stanford, because that's the work that they were doing at Stanford. And then some of the other work that I'm known for, things like the critical alphabet and things like that, were related to me poking holes in the way that we do design. So the positionality wheel, the designer's critical alphabet were about me questioning our design methods, and then proposing solutions, and then putting these prototypes out there into the world. So from Stanford, where I had a focus on teaching, but because I was in then this place where, with almost unlimited resources, I could think about, I was exposed to different kind of thinking, because before I had always been at resource poor institutions, which there are many all over the world. And then you go to a place like Stanford where no doesn't exist. It just starts to kind of open up the way you think about the world. And then from there, I went to Tulane, and I was a professor of practice in a social innovation center, and we did a lot of community engaged research. I was not on the the tenure path, but I benefited from the same training and support that tenure path faculty got. So imagine me as a designer in the same room as all of the professors in the med school and in across the engineers, and they were getting very, very structured information about how do you become successful on the tenure path? What could be your publication record? How are you preparing your dossiers, things like that? And then I heard this because they invited me. I was just on the new faculty roster, and I internalized, okay, this is how you get to success in that kind of what we call a comprehensive university in Canada, or maybe an R1 university in the States. Someone will probably have to send me a note on time, but I was probably invisible globally before 2018 or 2019. And I'm going to share another kind of international person tidbit in the background that people might resonate with. I had to qualify for something called an O1 visa, which is a genius visa, for my next job. And so it means that from 2019, like if you look for me online, you will see that I suddenly appear maybe globally in 2019, but it was actually very strategic. And so now when I mentor people, I do talk about that kind of strategy. I literally sat and worked with a strategist or publicist because I was now trying to qualify for a visa that depended on my reputation and my publications and my research funding and my, I had to write to Donald Norman and ask him for a recommendation. I didn't know him. It was the lawyers are also saying, you need to write to the person who's the top of your field and ask them for a recommendation. And I wrote to Don. Now I call him Don. And I said, hey, this is me. Will you recommend me? And he said, yes, you're doing kind of interesting things, right? So again, that's the kind of advice now that I give to people. Be bold, talk with people about what you need, because you have to figure out, to build on what Kelly just said, you have to figure out what you need for your success. So I met with my lawyers and my strategists, and they told me what I needed to get that visa, which I got. But it took a lot of work. It did mean a crazy amount of publications. So I worked on like 3 book projects in maybe 5 years. I learned some techniques about this research dissemination because I had to be so aggressive. I learned to take talks and turn them into papers. I would take a Zoom call and download the transcript and edit it and write it and analyze the transcript. And so, I share this also to because there is a question about barriers to research. And one of the big barriers is, I don't know about everybody else in this community, but I'm not really a writer, right? I'm a maker, I'm a visual person, and I had to learn how to write to do my PhD. And then I had to learn to write in a different way to qualify for this visa in a very short space of time. And I had to then learn with other people. I had to learn all these tips and tricks to be able to have the output as quickly as I could. And the reality is we are often doing research because I think I was always researching without maybe the formality of research, but I have a certain amount of curiosity just about life and the world, and there's some certain questions that I'm always interested in. But I hadn't learned how to disseminate it, share it. When I was in Trinidad, I didn't have the pressure of needing to qualify for a visa to survive. So I would do the interesting research and then never write a project about it, never write a paper about it. And so, part of this is learning to understand what you need for success. And if you are in an institution that needs publications, I mean, yes, you could spend some time challenging that, but you could also spend the time figuring out some techniques to make that work. One other thing I might say about work along the 5 universities. Tulane, where I spent 2 years, ended up being again a place that really changed my practice because I was not in a design school. I was in a center and then had to learn to speak with people in public health, in medicine, in, all across the university. And I joined a public health team as a designer, which then meant that when I went up for tenure, I had a $150,000 grant because we had won something like that. And those kinds of things matter in certain universities. Um, I guess I could probably stop here. I mean, I could talk for like 3 more hours, but maybe you don't want me to talk for 3 more hours. But
I
yeah,
would love
it's been
to
tough.
keep having all of you talk, but yeah, we should probably
Yes.
leave some time for QA for all those. I really appreciate all of the tips and things that you all shared, and Leslie, especially you for being vulnerable. I related to so many pieces of your story, and I didn't know all of that, so I felt like I just got a little behind the scenes. That was exciting, and I'm sure super helpful for everybody. Um, yeah. So, well, we should clap for one for everybody. Always so. And then, yeah, I mean, so we welcome, if, I don't know if Dan is able, but so folks that are in the attendees, you're welcome to request to come join us on this side. You can just also put questions in the chat, and certainly for the panelists, you can also ask questions of each other. I don't have any specific questions, more so that I just want to keep learning from all of you. And it was just really inspired and excited to see all the different kinds of work that was happening. Like super grateful for your time. And also the ways in which this space now and the recording in the future is going to help so many people. So, yeah.
Question in the chat from Brooke Holtz for Leslie. When did becoming a dean become part of your agenda?
Ah, becoming, yeah, becoming dean was never part of my agenda. But I guess that's what happens when you become visible, right?
Mm.
That yeah, that kind of leadership was not actually something that I was seeking, but I had been so maybe I was like part of this community of like critical scholars. So I would be like on the side, outside, kind of saying, well, you UX scholars, blah, 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 and and kind of pointing fingers at design and the way we did design. And then there's the work that I do in the Design Research Society about pluriversality. And I create communities where people who are from many different worlds share work. And so I suppose because I was visible, and you all probably know Dory Tunstall was the Dean of Design at OCAD. And I guess it's that, so OCAD is a radical school. We have some it's radical and it's not. I love the school, and I think other people would say that. And every space is like that. We have moments of radicality and moments of not. But in our academic mission, we have words like decolonization, indigenization, anti-blackness, and so I guess after Dory and I know each other, but not well. But I will publicly thank Dory for opening up then space in the work that she did before, because it's like maybe only a certain kind of person could have followed Dory, and a headhunter found me. That's the thing, and they probably found other people with that same kind of profile. So it's that when you become visible, there'll be different opportunities that come to you. And when it came, I just thought, huh, I wasn't thinking about this, but why not? You know, because really, if we want to change the field that we're in, then maybe we have to take on sometimes a leadership role, or there are different ways that we could change a field. And that was me taking up that challenge of saying, can I play a role in changing the field? And I accepted the challenge. At some point, I feel like I'll probably go. So I am these days I call myself both a global North and a global South scholar. And I do see myself at some point going back into the global South and being an ordinary teacher, really stepping out of this leadership role and just giving back to the community and promoting change, social change, because that's what I'm interested in. Right now, as in a leadership role, I can think about structural change. And in my notes, I actually have that I I'm not an active researcher right now. I facilitate research because we have 65 faculty members, and I have to make sure that we have the research supports for that to be able to happen. But yeah, I see myself going back to a different kind of role later on. So I see we have other questions in the chat.
Let's see. The next question is from Jamie. Again, it's for Leslie. Your talk was really inspiring and relate a lot to what you said about resources shaping how we think and what we imagine is possible. And we cannot deny that systems shape opportunities and visibility. I'm wondering, how do you personally navigate this now between working within the system and also questioning it?
Let me see how can I sound intelligent? Yeah, systems shape opportunities and visibility, and pressures might affect how you show up in systems. So, like, if I didn't have that kind of immigration pressure, I would have shown up differently in the system. But I had to be very aggressive because I had a specific timeline I was working with, or else I would have to be out of the country. I'm being very transparent and vulnerable here. And then that meant I pushed on the visibility bit in a different way that maybe people might have expected of me. I went to a conference once where a friend of mine who is European actually said to me, I don't understand why you are so confident. Like, you're a Black woman from a tiny island. How can you show up in these spaces with this confidence? But it is really about me kind of challenging the visibility that might be expected of a person like me. And I just show up and take up space, right? And actually, though, now I'll just respond to the leadership part of it. It does mean, so being in leadership means now that I can see these issues because I know these issues from my point of view. The first time I saw an issue across my faculty where I kind of looked at it and I'm like, is this an incident that's somehow tied to, I don't want to say racism, but like a racialized context? And I had to think about what was I going to do about it. And then I just kind of slapped myself in the face and I said, look, you're in leadership, you have to do something. So, I'm navigating it now. I have to recognize that I am in a position of power. I'm like third rank down in the university, and it means that I can change the structures. I can see the things that are holding people back and try to intervene and create new programs. And we don't have infinite resources, so it's difficult to it is difficult to come up with ideas that we can actually run but because I'm also from the global south, and I've in Trinidad, I literally taught a class under a mango tree once, and so I know that we don't always need the money to do things. It's that we have to want to do things, and then we act on them, right? Um, yes. And so, yeah, okay, I'll stop there. The next question is for Kelly.
Thank you. Yeah, next question's for Kelly is from Natasha. Is your residency part of a Fulbright grant? If not, could you talk about how to apply to these residency opportunities to make strategic plans for a sabbatical?
Yeah, I think early planning is key, right? Because if we know that a sabbatical is coming, trying to line up a residency or a research leave takes a lot of work. And in my case, those two things did not line up. I had a sabbatical. The original plan was that this would be a Fulbright stay at UCC, but that Fulbright was not successful. I still had my sabbatical. And then by the time this came through, it was a matter of finding funding that would support my leave from teaching from those two classes that I would be teaching in MSU. And so I was really lucky to have funding from the university. The Fulbright that I had applied for, and I reapplied, focused on sustainability. And it turns out that 200 of the 900 Fulbrights that were granted, if there was any mention of sustainability, resilience, diversity, and so on, they were cut. So the landscape is changing. The whole thing started when I met two like-minded designers, academics, sustainability advocates at a conference in Portugal in 2023. And we saw all this great like synergy and overlap between our research, and we got really excited about working together. And so from that point on, it was like, okay, we know we want to work together. How do we make this happen? And Fulbright was the first thought. And then when that wasn't going to happen, then it was a visiting researcher opportunity, which I am so grateful for. It took a lot of persistence and a lot of problem solving and a lot of like hitting the wall and turning and saying, okay, well, what if we try this and what if we try this? There was also a lot of kind of figuring that out from the family's perspective. I was talking to the group about this before we actually opened the webinar, but there are some, limitations in terms of if someone comes over as a visiting academic or a Fulbrighter, then the spouse cannot work. So things like that were surprises after we got pretty far into this process, and it was kind of a decision for the entire family at that point. So I'm really grateful to be here, and it is having absolutely a huge impact on my outlook and my expectations for the future and what I think I'll be doing after this and who I may be working with and the realms that I'll be working in. So I highly recommend it. Just be ready for a lot of work, and early planning is going to help a lot.
I have so many more questions for you that I'm going to email you at a later date.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I think our next question is for Robert. It's actually from Heather. But the question is, could you speak a bit more to the idea of carving out a totally new or newly framed area of study? Just thought that was very inspiring, and I will echo that. I'm curious how you went from doing more like maybe client-based design work earlier on to now doing things with the government, and how that's changed over time.
Or I guess I should say too, I don't, this is an area I don't know a lot about it, but it seemed to me like through your years of practice and research, you sort of recognized a need maybe to name something that could be or that was happening. Am I right? Am I right in my
Yeah, I
understanding?
mean, a few words that Leslie used. Vulnerability is a really great word, I think, and I've used that quite a lot in my own research journey. And that's as much about realizing that, in the sort of from the background that I had, I didn't think there was a great deal of sort of touch points out there in terms of what represented great research. And so, in the early days of my decision to move out of practice, and I kind of stopped practicing really. I made a decision in the late 1990s that actually I'd learned enough from graphic design, and I needed to look elsewhere to help me address some of the things that I was interested in. I wasn't quite sure what they were, but I knew that there was more to know. I wanted to know why local authorities and city councils and municipalities were happy to commission signage projects from architects and not graphic designers. When I got involved in those sorts of projects, it was the choice of typeface and mapping and all that kind of stuff, which was the real kind of interesting stuff once you started to table it. So I kind of felt that there was a bit of an absence there, of understanding in my field. So I therefore tried to, I guess, think about elevating that. But the last thing I wanted to do was really do a PhD with other graphic designers. I was much more interested in learning about the context that I'd been exposed to through collaboration with urban designers and architects and planners and city authorities. I kind of thought to myself, wow, there's a real gap in their understanding of stuff. Bearing in mind that I'd been working in corporate communications, doing corporate design work, which was a highly sophisticated commissioning process. When you're working for, broadcasters or whatever it was, there was a really highly sophisticated approach to commissioning design work, particularly in graphic design. But I didn't see that at all when I started to work with local authorities. So I made quite an early decision to, broaden the scope of what I could learn. And that's why I, went to study in a school of architecture. And I remember my first PhD supervision and turning up with, this kind of photo documentation of a journey that I'd done, which was pretty much what I'd been doing in practice. And, talking about humility and vulnerability, their first question was, yeah, but where's the research, Rob? And so that was a real dawning for me. Now, I was kind of in my mid-40s by then. So, that kind of sense of understanding that when you start thinking and working interdisciplinary, and actually, that it turned out to be a really great exchange between, urban designers and that I was being supervised by, and my interest in graphics. So I started working in that, looking beyond the subject. I think somebody else mentioned that idea of looking beyond the subject. I think maybe Kelly did, and wanting to know about the context within which, my core disciplinary knowledge really functioned. And actually, by the time I'd come to sort of, I guess, 10 years later, then I was working in a research-led institution, which had some really super researchers, doing things in sport and geography and all these areas. And I kept sort of exposing myself to them, thinking to myself, well, hang on a minute, you're using a lot of stuff around visual communication, around graphics. It's just not called that. And so I started to learn a lot from geographers and their use of graphicacy. I mentioned graphic images from Mitchell's work on iconology. And so I came to understand that actually, graphic designers are not the only graphic designers on the block, actually, and it's a much wider field. And therefore, I had to sort of accept that. I just moved beyond that space, really. And I draw very much from those sort of other disciplines, I suppose. But the real kind of switch was when I wrote a book in 2016 called Graphic Design and Urban Environments. And about a year later, I'd already been writing research bids and trying to, explore that territory. How do you get funding for your work? How can you do this interesting stuff? And I'd had some really good review scores, but no commissioning. And then the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, publicized their priority areas. And they were performance, design, and heritage. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm sure I can put together something to do with heritage. And it got me thinking about the relationship between heritage and design. And I'd already written about projects that some of you may be aware of, like the Comedy Carpet in Blackpool, really well-known award-winning pieces of design. And I thought, actually, you know what? Heritage is absolutely embedded in what we do as designers. And I now hold the view that, design is an act of heritage, because actually heritage is about preserving things from the past to project into the future. And that's what, of course, we do as designers. So design and heritage are inherently linked. And I use the I keep saying to local colleagues, look, it's not about brass horseshoes on the fireplace in a country public house. It's actually about the future. Heritage is very much a future focused practice. But the key thing I wanted to say there is that sense of, so I started to think about, my core disciplinary knowledge and heritage. And then, of course, that takes you into urban heritage and all that kind of stuff. And so as has happened a couple of times in my career, I thought I'd invented a new field. You know, I thought, oh, graphicacy, that's an interesting word, or graphicality, that's an interesting word. And you leave the environment that you're looking at and you find that, you know, loads of other people have already written about it. And it's the same with graphic heritage, actually. But graphic heritage actually started to emerge in South America. It came across to Europe, and then it starts to kind of spread out a little bit. And there's one or two people using it in Italy and places like that around 2015, 16. So, you know, you suddenly realize that your ideas are not that original. It's just that nobody's really shared them and broadened them out. So that again brings a bit of humility. You have to kind of realize that, you know, this is sort of taking off. But what I became transfixed with was this idea that, you know, heritage is actually embedded in our work as designers, however you want to think about it. And it's taken me 7 or 8, you know, years, I guess, to sort of realize that. But, you know, the great thing about it, and actually I'll maybe finish with a comment that a realization I had this week. You know, I started to do work in graphic heritage. It attracted the interest of several people. We really struggled to recruit people with PhDs in Loughborough in the graphic design area. As soon as we said that we had a graphic design research unit, people responded globally. And we moved from trying to recruit locally and nationally to recruiting globally. And one of the people who came to work with us, somebody called Yolandi Berger, applied for a post from South Africa. And, you know, they applied because they saw this research agenda around graphic design and it related to heritage. And so I guess there's 4 or 5 people, therefore, who I've been working with in the last few years who've helped develop this concept of heritage. And we very much approach it from the perspective of saying, look, how can you help with people like, for example, UNESCO? I sort of said to them, well, I think this can help you develop your objectives as UNESCO. This is UNESCO UK. And that was very interesting because these people are very busy. They won't give you their time. They don't have the time. But if you can align your objectives, and again, I think maybe Kelly or Leslie mentioned this, aligning your objectives with, you know, not only your own institution, but also collaborators. And we always start relationships now with a sense of, well, what's your mission statement and what are your objectives? Because we think we can kind of help you realize that. So this week we had an interesting, somebody came to spend a month with us on a residential fellowship from Nigeria. And it's somebody who'd been following our work. And she made a presentation early this week. And, you know, she presented back to us her interpretation of graphic heritage. And that was adding to what we had been doing. And I said to her, this is fantastic. You know, you're now bringing to us your interpretation of this idea. And that's contributing back to what we thought we were doing. So we're now learning. So this kind of sense of exchange, and I'm mostly working now with non-designers, really. And that's why I mentioned that notion of transdisciplinarity. I've, you know, come to understand what that means. This sense of actually working with non-academic partners and saying to them, look, how can you help us co-create this idea of graphic heritage based on the kind of challenges you have? And Nelson Mandela was a really great example. You know, the project came about because the colleague who came to join us from South Africa walked through a park in Leicester that was called Nelson Mandela Park and basically said, why is there a park in Leicester called Nelson Mandela Park? And we didn't know. And that took us in the direction of toponymy and topophilia and all these concepts which in geography are already established. But we then took that back to Nelson Mandela Foundation and we started to talk to them about places named after Nelson Mandela. Well, of course, that's all about representation to some extent, particularly whether it's about signage or commemorative plaques, all that kind of stuff. And I've been to India recently, and place naming is a big issue. It's a big colonial sort of agenda. So we're starting to identify themes and issues where, you know, graphic heritage has a real central place to be part of the conversation, but isn't necessarily or hasn't necessarily been part of that in the past. So, you know, for me, it's been a real joy to be looking at the last thing I'll say, which is being able to contribute something back. So I kind of got a bit fed up with this idea that, you know, we borrow from other disciplines, but we don't contribute anything back. And you know, I've learned a lot from geography, from architecture, from urban design, from urban studies, from heritage. And I just have this real sort of urge to say, well, when will they look at what we're doing and think that we're actually giving them something back in exchange? That's a fair deal, isn't it? We can't just keep absorbing other people's intellect and not offer them something back. So I kind of like that exchange. But so that was a bit of a long-winded rant. I'm sorry about that, but lots of kind of things going on there that I, yeah, needed to get out my system.
I'm super interested, but I'm going to be pondering that last thing you said for a while. I want to be mindful of time because we only have about 5 minutes, and want to leave a little time for follow-up. So maybe we have 30 seconds to a minute. I just want to, I think it's Victoria. I want to address their questions, which sort of sums up, I guess, the most recent one. Hopefully I didn't miss any others, which is how to balance research and providing opportunities for students. She says, I'd like to take on some projects, but sometimes I find them to be a good experience as a class client. Any thoughts on this? Welcome. So balancing research and providing opportunities for students.
I could maybe jump in at dean level.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would actually maybe be careful with the opportunity that's framed as an opportunity for students. And you know, the opportunity for students will always come from the research that you're doing. And so I think maybe you could be framing it around the questions that you are interested in and let the opportunity for students follow rather than starting with it being an opportunity for students. That might be a little bit confusing, but I see that happening. Now I have to do things like evaluate people's tenure and stuff like that, right? And you know, if you are only focused on the opportunity for students, sometimes you might pitch the work at, I don't know, a very specific level, right? But if you're following maybe the research question that excites you, that you know, then you might open up the way you frame it, because if it's an opportunity for students, you might be thinking, oh well, they're only undergrad students, so we'll only do X, and that might not get you far enough in the work that you want to do. But if you follow your curiosity, you can get to some interesting research questions that can still turn into opportunities for students. That might be, it might have been a little bit confusing. I know we're short for time, but I wanted to also add something to what Robert was saying. I think about the transition from maybe small R research to big R research has to do also with us understanding what already exists. You know, so I was always doing research, and then after I learned to do research more formally, I had to figure out how to situate my work in the field. I had to do these literature reviews. I had to understand what already existed to see if I was doing something different or not. And, you know, sometimes I'll put something out there and then realize that, yeah, 100 other people already did it. And now I'll write about it. You know, now I'll analyze it in a different way. So yeah, just wanted to drop that.
Yeah. That's a really good point too. Like, it's like when you try to do a logo and realize it's already been done 100 times, right? Same old thing. Alex, my peer at DePaul, and I didn't want to, we missed your questions, which are pretty deep and heavy, but maybe there's a quick point of advice, super fast. There's not. How do you define, uh, Alex says, how do you define the value of a research? Does design research need to be quantifiable, or is there an alternative measure? How do you determine whether your research will be valuable to institutions and or the field? And I feel like Alex's questions are really the essence of why Jessica and I started this series. So Alex, I would say too, if you haven't seen some of the earlier research talks, there are some from some peers from DePaul and so on. That's also a good place to start. And I think Kelly, you kind of talked specifically about this by institutional measures and what's valued and how to disseminate and how that's valued. So I feel like you were touching on that a little bit. But again,
Robert raised his hand too.
yeah. Any quick thoughts for Alex?
Can I just say, there's quite a big impact agenda in the UK associated with research. I think for about 15 years, when you applied for a research funding bid, you had to put your pathways to impact and potential impact. And I've just written an impact case study, which is a national research framework requirement in the UK for what we call REF. And there's some very interesting discussions I think that we need to have around what's the difference between pathways and impact and actual impact. And actual impact is really about, the change that takes place as a result of your research beyond the borders of your institution. So it is about, how your research is having impact, social impact, economic impact, whatever that might be, outside of the sort of institution. So, research presenting to your peers is one thing, but actually having an impact on the world, and having the testimonies and the sort of endorsements that demonstrate that is what falls into a fairly big impact agenda in the UK at the moment. And there's a lot been written about that, and be very happy to explore that further outside of this meeting if anybody's interested, because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. It's interesting just to even hear the language that's articulated from another place, because I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I think some of the words are just like frames it in my head in a slightly different way, which is really useful. Um, so, um, so I just want to say, I have admired all of your work for quite some time. And Leslie spoke so highly of you, Robert. So it's just nice to have you all together. And I am continually learning so much. So I feel like probably reach out to all of you individually for multiple things, which is really exciting. And I know, again, I also want to give a shout out to my student, Jordan, who's in the chat, because she did these lovely graphics for all of you, and we were really excited about that. So again, giving opportunities to students and then getting to use them even on things like Zoom backgrounds is very exciting. Anything else that you want to add, Jessica?
No, I just say thank you all for a really inspirational time. I think there were some common threads that I picked up through all of everything you were talking about. Activism came up in so many different forms and ways, and this was a great discussion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.